I can see a blank screen. Okay, yeah.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for attending. And yes, welcome to the public information session for curbside collection services and the Assent vote, the referendum for areas F and H for today, April 25th, 2024. And yeah, just please note that this meeting is being recorded. Okay, so the upcoming referendum for garbage, food waste, and recycling. As Director Newell mentioned and introduced us, my name is Matt Morrison. My role is the organics coordinator with the Regional District Central Kootenay. So I primarily work with the team to promote and encourage and increase the amount of organic waste that is diverted from our region's landfills. And I've also been coordinating the process of bringing the concept and the proposal for curbside collection services in rural areas to this point of an Assent vote over the last couple of years since I've been with the organization. We also have Elaine Hamilton with the RDCK, and oh, I should have changed out Amy for Elaine there. My apologies. And as well as our manager Uli, who unfortunately isn't actually in attendance. I didn't update this slide right before. My apologies.
We can't actually see any slides.
So Matt, I was pausing for a moment.
You can't see my slide?
Your slides aren't shown.
Oh, thanks for letting me know. I'll kind of just back up there. What do you see?
Blank screen.
Oh,
Your blank. There we go. No, now we're back to Zoom.
Oh, good. Okay. We'll try that again. I apologize and thanks for the you interrupting because yeah, otherwise I would have just carried on. Zoom is a bit of a new adventure for us. We've been in the WebEx world for quite some time and we're just dipping our toes into Zoom.
There you are there now.
You can see the presentation slide there.
Yes.
And okay, is that on outline, meeting, agenda, introduction?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
wonderful.
You're good now.
Okay. Great. Yeah. So sorry about that. We do also for staff. Yeah, Elaine Hamilton is with us, and Director Popoff is also at the meeting. And thank you for the territory acknowledgement earlier. So as Director Newell mentioned, just a few high-level guidelines for the meeting, specifically for, actually, you know, this isn't terribly relevant. This was more for the in-person side of things. And we expect, yeah, that things will go really well later on. So I do want to just get into some background.
Matt,
what's up?
Oh, I'm monitoring chat. And now Amy and Mike, we can see about a quarter of the slide, just the top left. But Valley, I can see it all. Valley Voice can see the whole slide. So Amy and Mike, I'm not sure how your screen is set up that it's not all visible.
Is there like a
Yeah, Tom, they'd have to go to full screen. Generally, when I signed in, I was only in the left-hand corner. And then when I went to full screen, I see everything.
Okay, so Amy and Mike, you need.
Thanks for that. Yeah, so I did pause recording there and I've just started it back up. And then let me know what you can see there. Resource recovery plan. I was giving some background on the resource recovery plan and the guidance that document provides for managing waste in the region over the 10-year period from 2022 forward. I mentioned the feasibility study completed in 2020 that assessed the feasibility and promoted or recommended the RDCK investigate that kind of service further. In 2021, a round of consultation was completed in the areas that were considered feasible. And that preliminary consultation indicated strong support for the concept of the service. Last year, January through April of 2023, we completed another round of consultation and received almost 1,300 survey responses across the region. And we identified support for this kind of service in specific communities and some parts of given electoral areas, which is sort of what brings us to the service establishment bylaw, which is what people are voting on, and what provides the ability of the RDCK to enable the service, to establish the service only through the process of holding the referendum, allowing the voters to decide if they support the bylaw, which would enact or enable the ability to provide curbside services. So just a visual timeline on that, 2020 and 2021, the feasibility study and phase 1 consultation were completed. In 2023, another round of consultation was completed. The results of these reports are available online and publicly available documents. So if you have questions about that, please do review those. Through the fall and winter of 2023, we developed the service establishment bylaws, which included the geographic boundaries for the service, as well as the per household costs and the maximum amount that could be charged. May 11th is general voting for the proposed services. And if the referendum passes and services are to be established, that would occur mid-2025 at the earliest is the current projection. Want to talk about voter eligibility and if folks who live and are interested in this one way or another are eligible to actually vote in the referendum. A few criteria: basic voting eligibility for municipal and electoral area elections. So those 18 plus Canadian citizen BC residency requirement is 6 months, piece of mail with proving that you reside in BC. You also have to be a resident of the service area. So you have to be within the service area boundary and have your place of residence or home ownership in another case, be within the specific defined portion of electoral area F and H. And you can confirm your eligibility and register to vote, which is a very straightforward process at the polls. You don't have to sort of pre-confirm per se. Generally speaking, if you live within anywhere that is highlighted in green on the map here, then you would be considered eligible to vote in the referendum. There is some differences between voter eligibility and service eligibility in the sense that more people can vote in the service than may actually receive it, just because of some nuances with how we can develop these things. You know, people who live in maybe multifamily housing, which wouldn't be considered eligible for services per se, can actually vote in the referendum. But generally speaking, if you're a resident and you live in a single family home and this is, you know, a service that you're aware of, and you know, you and your neighbors have been talking about this, then please get out to vote, confirm your voter eligibility, and participate in the process. The other category for voter eligibility is if you own property but live elsewhere. So similar criteria with provincial and municipal elections. You have to be a registered owner for the past 30 days, and you only get 1 vote per owner of a property within the service area. So even if you have multiple properties throughout the service area, for example, you would still only get 1 vote. And if you co-own a piece of property, you would need the written consent of the other owners. And you can confirm this and review voter eligibility. And also there's a form for your co-owners to express their consent as well. Okay, so I wanted to get into the service in terms of what it entails regarding the frequency of the proposed collection and the concept of the bins and that kind of stuff. So the core of the service is really a weekly food waste collection, collected at the road or the curb, wherever your driveway meets a public road. We would provide the bins for all 3 services. The food waste bin specifically would be certified through either WildSafe BC or another third-party certifier as being bear resistant. And so this would refer to the ability of the bin to withstand multiple attempts at entry from a bear. We aren't saying that they're bear proof because we don't really think that there's such thing as a bear proof curbside bin. And this is something where bins, you know, still have to be managed and kept in a secure location and stored and you know, kept clean, and other strategies for mitigating attractants. And we go into that in a bit. But this, while bear resistant certified bin would enable those service to be developed in a wild safe manner. It also provide a small kitchen catcher, roughly 10 liters, that would you know, sit on your counter, and you would be able to transport that material into the curbside bin. The garbage service would be every 2nd week, and a wildlife resistant, not a bear resistant container would be included in that to prevent, you know, dogs and skunks and raccoons and other smaller critters from being able to sort of tip that bin over and get into it, but it wouldn't hold up to the same level of damage as a bear might inflict. And then the recycling would also be every second week. And in this case, the garbage and the recycling would alternate, with food waste being picked up on a weekly basis. So you'd have the weekly food waste 1 week with garbage, and then the weekly food waste the other week with recycling, and those would alternate. So every week you'd have 2 bins out if you chose to use the service. It would not be a mandatory service in the sense that you wouldn't be required to use it. But I get into sort of the finances and the or, you know, who has to pay and can you opt out and that kind of stuff, just in a little bit. Yeah, I wanted to describe the bins in a little bit more detail. We have significant grant funding, which allows us to purchase, or would allow us to purchase, earlier, more expensive rugged bins than typically we'd be able to access without that grant funding. And we really are committed to providing a bear resistant bin for all households. We've modeled the service off of other communities that have a lot of bear conflicts and issues with food conditioning. The locking mechanism, or the way that the bin would resist bears, is through a lid locking mechanism, something that would prevent the lid from being opened. And the bin itself would also have to be made out of rigid and strong material. We've been in consultation and continue to have conversations with Wildlife BC and the Conservation Office Service to ensure that we would roll out this program, and we've been considering and designing the program in a manner that would be considered as safe as possible for wildlife. The size of the container is expected to be between 40 and 80 liters, most likely the 46 size for a food waste service. That's typically more than enough on a weekly basis. These bins haven't been purchased. We haven't sort of selected the exact specs, et cetera. That would all occur after and if the referendum passes and we go through that competitive bidding process for all elements of the service. The garbage bin would, again, we haven't decided, would likely be around 120 liters, which is your standard garbage can, like small garbage can size. And I'd mentioned its ability to, you know, keep out dogs and rats and skunks and raccoons, etc. Noting that other attractants, sort of your food waste and other things, should be in that bear resistant bin, and then anything else, any residual material that might be attractive, you'd obviously have to manage that very carefully, as is currently done throughout the region. And then the recycling. So again, the exact bin size shape hasn't been selected. We won't do that until the next steps. The benefit, or one of the potential benefits, of the curbside recycling versus a self-haul to the depot service is that you can put your paper, your cardboard, metal cans, and hard plastics all on the same containers, so you don't have to separate all those and fit them into the different areas. However, there still are a couple categories where you would need to go into a core recycling depot for soft plastics and styrofoam, and then glass is also we wouldn't expect that to be collected at the curb. So the bulk of material, certainly most of the material that gets that makes up the volume of a given household's recycling, can go at the curb and through that biweekly collection. But I do want to note that there are a few items that would still need to go into the depots. Okay, just going to review a few considerations and things that we've talked about in regards to the logistics of the service and sort of how we imagine the service to be delivered in a safe and a reliable, effective manner. So bins that people were supplied with would need to be placed wherever private drive meets a public road. We use the term curbside. It could mean roadside. It could mean gravel roadside. It's, you know, it's not, we understand that not everyone has curbs per se. Bins would need to be set back from roads, especially, you know, in the winter, just so they're not, you know, getting impacted by traffic and not getting impacted by clouds, etc. Certainly winter services are challenging, but these types of services are delivered in many communities throughout British Columbia that have long winters and lots of snow. So, you know, you might need to make some adjustments to exactly how you place your bin and sort of take your local situation into account. But you place those bins off of main roads and highways so they're not getting impacted by traffic and plows, etc. And we do note that there are private waste collection services operating throughout the Kootenays that deliver these services year round. They don't report, and we haven't heard from these providers or their customers or throughout the many years of doing research for these kinds of services that those existing services run into substantial logistical challenges. Certainly there will be some, and we would have to approach those with a creative and open mind and kind of come up with troubleshoots as they come along and take unique situations into account. But do note that these services exist. For example, there's a curbside collection weekly food waste service that runs from Bridesville all the way to Midway in the regional district Kootenay boundary, and all up and down through Rossland and Trail and Fruitvale. Rural highway corridor related communities, and these we would lean on and rely on experts within their fields of hauling and road maintenance and safety to provide guidance and ensure that this kind of service could be delivered in a safe and effective manner. I do want to jump into wildlife a little bit deeper because I think it's worth slightly more time because it is a really big issue. We live in bear country. We have lots of bears that call this place home, and in no way do we and this initiative have an intent or desire to exacerbate bear habituation. And in fact, we perceive that these kinds of services may alleviate certain issues that arise from bear habituation and wildlife issues in our communities. This is the same waste that is currently within households that we're talking about providing services for. So you either have a garbage and you're managing your waste in a responsible way by having secure storage, and maybe you're composting, but you're doing so in a reliable way. Either way, it's the same waste. This is a different way of managing it, or potentially augmenting how you manage your waste. Obviously, leaving carts out in the open full of food waste is not an option, and people would ideally have secure storage. That's hopefully something people have sort of sorted out already in these sorts of environments. If you don't have indoor storage, perhaps you can lock these types of bins and secure them to something using either ratchets or something to really prevent that bin from being dragged away, because that's really when bears can access these bins, is when they get dragged away. And so if these bins can stay locked to something with the lid locking mechanism, then we actually see, and it's through working with colleagues that implement these services in other communities, that those actions in combination with each other can actually prevent bears from accessing these bins. Certainly bins would need to be cleaned out on a semi-regular basis, and you can use a bin liner to mitigate certain smells. And another good trick is to freeze or refrigerate super attractive food like meats and cooked foods between the week, and then put that out just on the morning of collection, so it's not accumulating smell and rotting in the bin during the week. And then you can also layer within the bin. You can put carbon or leaves, straw, shredded newspaper, that kind of thing to sort of balance out the material, and that can keep smell down, act as a buffer. And then the other component of this is we do have a fairly robust population of other critters. Certainly those bins would prevent skunks, raccoons, and coyotes and dogs from getting into them, the food waste bin. And then rats is a really big one to mention. I know backyard composts, people are passionate backyard composters, and that's wonderful. We are aware that backyard composts are a source of rats, and as an invasive species, these creatures get into compost and they eat and they breed around their sources of food, and compost piles typically are a source of food for a lot of animals, for a lot of rats rather. And so having a food waste collection service, I think really would cut back on the rat infestation issue that we've heard is occurring throughout the North Shore and through other communities within the catchments of this proposed service. So I think that's something to take into consideration when looking at the pros and cons of this kind of thing. It may not solve all problems, and it would have to be done in a really responsible manner with a lot of education. those are sort of some of our considerations as we review the challenges associated with this kind of service.
Matt, just to interrupt you for a second, I believe there's someone waiting in the waiting room. I don't have host access.
Oh, you're not able to.
Sorry for the interruption.
That's okay. Thank you for letting me know. Yeah, we need to review some of the functionality of Zoom in that regard from back end. Hi, folks. Welcome. Sorry for making you wait in the lobby. I didn't realize that you folks were back in the lobby there. This is being recorded, so for any content that was missed, we'll be posting the video online, and that will actually be made available on our YouTube channel. Just about to jump into information related to costs and the per household fee associated with the proposed service. We as staff have worked to develop this estimated, it's an estimated cost. We've determined that, and it's now a fixed maximum requisition amount. And so this $280 per household per year for areas F and H is a maximum, and that service cannot actually cost more than that per household. Get into that in a little bit more detail. What you'll see on the ballot will be the larger number, the $596,235. So that really is just a factor of the per household cost multiplied by the number of households in the service area, 2,129. And what makes up that $280 per household per year is really mostly the cost of the collection service itself. And so this would be a contracted service. It wouldn't be an in-house service. That's over half of the estimated cost to actually pay someone to go and pick up that material. And then the material needs to then be brought to a facility where it goes over the scales, and there's a fee associated with the weights that are brought over that scale, and those tipping fees are built in. So the estimated tipping fees that we would expect based on sort of average per capita waste generated, that's been built in. We built in some administration staff time to coordinate the collections contract, to develop and deliver the education and promotional material, etc. 1% of the budget is for education and promotion. This is per household, and then we built in a fairly healthy contingency, or we perceive as a relatively conservative contingency of 15 to 20% to allow us to maintain that maximum requisition amount and then deal with inflationary pressures over time. And I'll get into how the price per household can or may increase over time. But first, I just want to give you a quick look at what the ballot question will be. A lot of words here, don't worry too much about it, but effectively, you will be voting whether or not you're in favor of the RDCK adopting the service establishment bylaw. I mentioned that in the past, which is really the mechanism that the RDCK can use to establish the service and then charge households for that service. So this would be a standalone service based on a per household cost. This is the details that will be provided at the ballot, and it's just a yes, no, are you in favor of said service and said bylaw and the cost. You frequently asked questions in a bit more detail on the cost and cost recovery. The $280 per household per year is a maximum for the first 5 years that the service is established. So if the service goes ahead, the cost could not exceed $280 until 5 years after establishment of the service. So, potentially 2029 in this case. We can set the price lower than the maximum requisition amount, the MRA, and then gradually increase over time, over the period, 5-year period per se, to get to that maximum requisition, but it can't increase above that in the first 5 years. After 5 years, and then every 5 years thereafter, prices can increase by up to 25%. And this is to allow the organization to recover costs in the event that the maximum requisition amount isn't allowing for full cost recovery and cost neutrality. And so there's no no profit margin in this kind of service. It is looking to be a standalone cost neutral service, but price costs may need to go up over time to accommodate, you know, inflationary pressures and other things like that. The way that funds would be collected would be through either a utility fee or a parcel tax. And so this would be a standalone service collected through these specific mechanisms, and which mechanism or which method of cost recovery that is selected will be decided by the board of directors through a separate bylaw if and when the referendum passes. It's not a general tax. Vacant lots wouldn't be charged. Only those who have access to the service would be charged for the service. However, and this is something that's quite frustrating for people, understandably so, we don't have the option to provide an opting out clause within the service. And so even if you're in the no category and you don't support the service and it goes ahead, you would be charged for the service. You wouldn't be required to use the service. It wouldn't be mandatory in that way, but it would be, you would be charged for the service. The reason we can't provide an opting out clause is because it's really administratively challenging to sort of have that juggling of who's in and who's out. And really we're relying on a fixed number of households to come up with that per household cost, and therefore the economy of scale to make it possible to deliver the service at a relatively cost-effective price point. And so if you're in or you're out in terms of support, I understand that the opting out and not wanting to pay for something that you don't want to use is, that makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, with this kind of service and for many services within the society we live in, we do pay into services even if we don't necessarily want them or support them in certain capacities. So really do encourage the exercise of voting in this process, because it is reliant on the electors, and that whatever the electors decide in this case will be what occurs. Okay, thanks everyone for sticking with me here. Almost through the presentation, and then yeah, I'll open it up for questions at the end. So why is the RDCK considering this? Why is this a potential benefit, or what are the potential reasons for a curbside collection service, especially in the rural areas, for example? The big one, as I'd mentioned, was the food waste component, the organic waste. And by having this kind of service, you increase the options and the availability and the ease of diverting materials that shouldn't be going into our landfills. And so organic waste makes up, on average, 35% of household waste. We know in our regional audits that it's close to 30%, at least for single family homes. A green bin pickup does accept more items than you typically would compost. So even if you are a backyard compost, you know, maybe you're not putting your cooked food or your oily foods and solidified grease, and a green bin can take fish meat and small bones and dairy and grains and food sold paper and cardboard. And so perhaps this kind of service could augment what you're already doing, you know, through seasonal fluctuations that maybe your backyard composter can't manage, or through the winter when things slow down in that regard. So there's a potential benefit or use case in that element of it. The curbside collection services provided across the service area do provide equal access to service in regards to, you know, being able to use the pickup. Certainly, there's some challenges to maintain that through the year, just based on geography. But there's, you know, most people should be able to save trips to the landfills and transfer stations if they were to have access to this service. Reducing the number of single occupant vehicles crossing our scales and using those facilities on a regular basis. And as I mentioned, it's easier to separate your waste streams if you have a service like this. It's easier for you to use a recycling bin and use a green bin and decrease your landfill waste and increase your diverted waste. The cost effectiveness in terms of what we're proposing the maximum requisition, or what we've set the maximum requisition amount at compared to private sector services, is very much a price, it's a cost-effective and relatively low price for this level of service. Certainly, if you're to access it on an individual level, it would be substantially more. So it's whether or not it's more or less than you currently pay, it is a cost-effective service or a cost-effective proposal. And if you don't already, I do just want to point to the benefits of recycling and that we live in a province where we have effective legislation that enables a proper recycling process where materials that are collected from residential recycling services are recycled in British Columbia, and they have useful end markets, and it's actually a fairly effective and good quality circular economy system. And if you're not familiar with how the recycling system works in BC, recyclebc.ca, which is the organization that manages this on behalf of the province, has a great website with lots of resources on how recycling works in British Columbia. A couple more slides here, and I think this one speaks to the environmental benefit of reducing our waste in general, but specifically keeping organic waste out of our landfill. When organic waste is put into our landfill, it exacerbates or makes worse the impact that landfills have on the environment. They collect sort of the liquid runoff and accumulate contamination, and that sort of liquidy contaminated material is actually quite expensive and difficult to manage within the landfills. It also just takes up space that really reduces the lifespan and time frame that we have. Our landfills are finite and they're extremely costly sites to manage, and we don't really have the ability to build new landfills. Those are very expensive sites and facilities to build and operate. So everything we can do to extend our landfill and divert materials from it actually saves taxpayers dollars in the long run by not having to buy a new landfill sooner. And then a fairly compelling one, in my opinion, is the impact of methane gas emitted from landfills. And so when organic waste especially is buried in a landfill where there's no access to oxygen or soil microbes or anything like that, it rots in the absence of oxygen. And when organic waste rots without oxygen, it emits methane, and that's through the process of anaerobic or oxygen poor loving bacteria decomposing that material without oxygen, and methane is emitted. And at scale across the country, landfills generate 23% of our methane that's produced in Canada, which is a substantial number just from landfills. And then as a greenhouse gas, when methane is emitted, it actually is able to trap heat in our atmosphere up to 80 times more effectively than carbon dioxide. So by reducing the amount of landfilled organic waste, we can have fairly substantial and meaningful impact on reducing our local greenhouse gas emissions, and methane just is such a potent example of that. It's so preventable. We really shouldn't be putting this material into our landfills, especially when you think about the ability to take this material and instead turn it into compost, and that is where this material goes, and that is what we're doing. So just to touch on the composition of waste materials within the RDCK, up to 60 to 65% of what is landfilled is divertible material. And so whether or not that's compostable organic material or recyclable material, it's a substantial amount of waste that we're putting into our regional landfill that should not be going into it, that is divertible material. And so there's a lot of work that we need to do to promote diversion services. We think that curbside collection is an element of that, and we think that it could support those diversion goals. But our local waste composition data backs up those claims that we absolutely need to be doing more. And just a couple more here. One of the really amazing things about these actions, at least when implemented at scale, is that we can keep these materials out of our landfills, and then we can do something good with them. And so the RDCK has invested over the last few years substantial amounts of money into building the infrastructure required to accept and process this material into compost. And so we now have a relatively new composting facility just south of Salmo called the Central Compost Facility that takes the material, we mix it with wood waste and other high carbon materials. This is with the food waste that's collected from surrounding municipalities. We turn it into Class A compost, using an aeration system and a moisture system that maintains ideal environment for microbes to operate and break down that material. You know, a lot of that material that you typically wouldn't decompose or compost at home breaks down in these types of facilities super quickly because of the temperatures that are able to be reached and just the ideal environment that's created for those decomposer microbes to do their work. So it really is a great example of circular economy and the ability of us to turn a waste into a resource. Okay, so just really want to hammer home, advanced polls are coming up on the 1st, next Wednesday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then general voting is Saturday, May 11th, again, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., both at the RDCK head office, 202 Lakeside Drive, as well as the Crescent Valley Hall out in Crescent Valley. So make sure you're aware of that, have that in your calendars, and yeah, please talk to your neighbors and get out to vote in the referendum for these proposed services. Okay, we'll open it up to questions from the public, and we can take a look at the chat.
Gordon has a question in chat, Matt.
Okay, go ahead. Do you want to read that out?
Okay, I will read that out. Gordon, please clarify what can be put into the recycle or not.
Okay, yeah, great question. So what can go in would be paper, cardboard, hard plastic, so yogurt containers, clamshell containers from like strawberries or lettuce or whatever, and tin cans as well. We call it printed paper and packaging is the high level. And then what could not go in would be glass, soft plastics or flexible plastics. So, you know, bags, things like that, as well as styrofoam is not collected at the curb. Those are the flexible plastics and styrofoam have to go to a core recycling depot. So there's one currently at Lakeside Drive, and then the glass can go to any recycling depot.
Okay, we do have another question from Marcel. When can we expect the results of the election? It's not election, the referendum, I presume he means. And when would be the service start if approved? And I think you've covered that, but if you want to repeat that again.
Yeah, no problem. The results are expected to be posted on May 13th. So that's a Monday, May 13th. And then if the referendum passes, services we'd be working very hard to put services in place by mid-2025. We don't want to pick a month just because it's sort of contingent on a bunch of factors, but mid-2025 is when we feel like we would be able to deliver the service. So that would, you'd expect that in the summer, 2025, I think.
Okay, we have another question here from Allison Sayers. Can you please clarify again how many eligible electors per household may vote? Is it just one?
Yeah, no. So any resident who is eligible to vote and lives in the area can vote. So say you have a household of 4 people and 3 of them are above the age of 18, live in the area, etc. All 3 would be able to vote. It's not per household. If you're an out of area property owner, then only one owner can vote in the referendum. But if you're a resident, then anyone who's a resident, including tenants, landlords, kids, who live at home or whatever, can vote as long as they meet those other criteria.
So I do have another question in chat again from Brent, and he was late in joining in. So I don't know if you want to go through this again, Matt, or not. What containers does the system use? I logged in late.
Yeah, I'll try to answer that without having a ton of context, but we'd be looking at a manual service or a semi-automated service. So the containers themselves, we haven't picked. We won't decide on the exact container until if and when the referendum passes or goes ahead. The green bin would be relatively small, probably around a 46 liter. The garbage would be about 120 liter, and the recycling we don't know. Standard recycling container size, and the wildlife components for the curbside bins the green bin would be bear resistant, and the garbage would be wildlife resistant. And these would be containers that a driver would manually either put onto a lift or would be picked up and dumped, not sort of an automated arm that picks up the bins and dumps it into the truck. Right? Yeah, thanks for the question. Hopefully that answers it. If not, you could go back. This is being recorded, and you could go back and look at that later on.
So we do have another question from Sean. Would the existing recycling stations, Crescent Valley, Roman Narrows, etc., remain in place for the materials not collected at curbside?
Yeah, I can answer this quickly, and maybe Uli wants to jump in as well. But we aren't expecting to close facilities based on the outcome of the referendum, and so we're expecting that facilities that are used by the surrounding areas, with those facilities need to stay in place. There are some changes forthcoming to, I believe, the Lakeside facility, but that's not directly related to the curbside.
I can speak to that, Matt. So we do currently investigate the possibility of closing the Lakeside depot. Background is that we have with Groman and Lakeside two fairly large depots in relatively close proximity. The Lakeside depot is located on City of Nelson land, and the lease contract for these lands are in excess of or around $60,000 a year, so relatively high. Plus, having two depots forces us to have staff at two different depots and have service contracts for two different depots. So by combining, we are hoping we can, by combining the two depots, we would have considerable savings in comparison to maintaining two depots in relatively close proximity. So that's the plan, independently what happens with curbside services.
Also, Matt, I don't know if you've got access to chat. There is Amy and Mike that have a fairly lengthy question in there. If you can read that and respond to it.
Okay, yeah, I do see the question, and I'll read it out. So I understand from listening to Area J's meeting that the defined Area H houses were added because Area F did not have enough houses for the Recycle BC requirement of minimum houses. Since Recycle BC is a major component of this service, and we know that the RDCK is currently having an issue collecting money from Recycle BC, what is the plan for the board if Recycle BC does not pay as promised? Will you be using the board's power to receive and approve debt? I'd say most of that would be better answered by a director. I will just mention that the
Matt, maybe I can first.
Yeah, please. Yeah, thanks.
So there's a bit of a misconception that Recycle BC is not paying us according to contract. What the situation is that Recycle BC pays what it says in their approved plan from ministry, from provincial level approved plan, collection plan. Problem is that we have a fairly large and rural area, and we have decided as an organization or as a waste sub-region to maintain a fairly large number of depots in order to maintain the service level that residents were used to before we joined Recycle BC. That means we have only a certain number of depots that we are allowed or have subsidized by Recycle BC. That means we maintain a host of what we call satellite depots, not core depots, have to pay not only the staff at these locations and whatever else is entailed in these facilities, as well as the transport of these materials from the satellite depots to our core depots. So this system plus the staffing at all of the core depots, that's as well our cost. So we have a significant recycling cost that is not covered by the fees that we receive from Recycle BC for the materials that we collect. That is a large number, but it is not that it is illegal or that Recycle BC is not paying their contracted or agreed upon amounts. It is that the EPR programs simply pay for the point of from the point of collection on for the transport of the materials and the processing, but not for the cost of collecting these materials. They only provide a relatively small subsidy for the collected materials that are by far not reimbursing for our cost to collect these materials. So that's the situation. So when you refer to and refer to discussions that you may have heard on board level or in resource recovery meetings and have heard directors complaining about that, that is about the fact that we are still maintain a relatively high cost level for the regional district under the current system. That is something the directors hope to change over time by lobbying with the province to put pressure on RBC in future plans. And these plans, like I said before, are approved by the province. In future plans to come up with a higher reimbursement scheme that would reduce our cost of maintaining these services.
Thank you. I do have another question here from Allison Sayers, and the question is, what is the projected lifespan of RDCK landfills if this referendum passes? Will landfill lifespans be significantly lengthened? And I think we're only talking about one landfill, which is the Otishania landfill currently in this area. Uli, you're probably better positioned to answer that one than myself. I know we've extended the lifespan of the Otishania life for quite a few years.
Yeah, I can't give you a totally simple answer. So there's a few things that are playing into it. First of all, our current landfill is undergoing a new operations plan that will and design plan that will change the shape of the landfill, not necessarily the footprint, but the shape of the Otishania landfill, and by doing so, increase significantly the capacity of that facility. That capacity is not, and maybe Amy, you can correct me if you have a clear number, but is not fully defined to a great detail, but the lifespan of the landfill is, if we get this design change fully approved in that form and implemented, is likely going to be in the 50-year span of remaining life at that landfill. The landfill takes in currently about 20,000 tons of waste. So every 1,000 tons of waste diverted will expand the landfill life every year by about 5%. So that's, in very rough terms, what the current projections or what they look like. We don't know how much we will divert from that rural area stretch, and we are hoping, if this is approved by the residents and it is a success, that other areas will show interest in expanding these services into other areas. But again, we will have to wait what the interest in this service is expressed through this referendum, And like I said, we are hoping to increase diversion from the landfill. Organics diversion isn't the only program. Parallel, and I think Matt may have referred to that already. We're looking at the institutional, commercial, and industrial sector as well in regards to organics diversion. And all of these are elements in our diversion strategy overall to reduce waste going into the landfill. I hope I answered the question.
Hey, I don't see any more questions in chat right now. And Tom, I'm sorry for butting in. You're supposed to be chairing this meeting, but I did agree to monitor chat for you.
Hey, Matt, I have a question.
There's a question.
And there is another question, I think.
Yeah, can the board member please confirm or deny that if the fees exceed the budget during the first 5 years, the board can create debt to get themselves to the end of 5 years? I've heard different stories and would like to know what the actual process is should the service be inadequately funded. So again, this is probably not a question for the directors, but more so for staff and the legal process in this. We are bound to work within a budget framework that does not run a deficit. We spoke, and I don't know if anybody of you was in the in-person meeting 2 days ago. The situation is such that we are bound by the $280 maximum for the first 5 years, as Matt explained. What that means is we need to consider before we start up this service if we can manage this service for at least 5 years within this financial framework. Part of that is that we tender the services through to a private company in some form, and that is the first step. That will likely be a 5-year contract. So we have, inclusive any inflationary adjustments on an annual basis, we have a firm number on the contracted cost. Beyond that, we have a relatively good idea what the tipping fees are going to be over the 5-year or annual timeframe over the 5 years. And all of these, including any associated staffing cost, is the consideration before we start this service up. The decision will be by the directors when we put the financial plan before them for the 5-year term of this service to gauge if staff has appropriately provided numbers that safely allow us to manage this service within that set and through the referendum approved financial boundaries, the $280 per year for 5 years each. Or a maximum of $280 per household per year. I hope that explains it. If not, please ask a more pointed question.
Okay, apparently Mike said thank you. So seeing no more further questions, I'll turn it back to the chair.
And I'll turn it back. Well, Matt, I have a question. Hey, can a bit of yard waste go in the compost, the organics on a weekly basis?
So technically we aren't looking to provide a commingled yard and garden with food waste service. That said, if we do have listed as accepted material, yard and garden material that doesn't need to be chipped. So this would be like grass, leaves, small twigs, things like that. And in fact, I think there's a benefit to adding some of those brown materials in between layers of food waste, as long as I think it fits within the weights and the size of the weekly pickup. Small amounts wouldn't upset the operations in any way, and I don't think we would reject those kinds of loads. But it's not, the intent of the service is not to be a yard waste pickup, but small amounts would be acceptable.
Yeah,
So
the bin size is your limiting factor here.
bin size, okay. So they are, a couple of the house plants I kill might be able to fit in.
Oh, house plants are absolutely fine. House plants and like cut flowers and things
Right.
like that. We don't want soil, like sod or soil, because just the risk of there being like rocks and stuff. But yeah, and there is another question actually.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, there is another question in chat from Brent to everyone, and it's a fairly lengthy question, and he's wondering how this would benefit him. And I don't know, possibly Matt or Wooly can answer that.
Yeah, I mean, it might not be a benefit, and I think that it sounds like you're doing a great job of managing your waste and using the services that are available. So, you know, it's definitely not something that is going to fit into everyone's life and may not be a benefit to everyone. It's impossible to have a one-size-fits-all service across a you know, diverse geographic and
that is ultimately the intention of the referendum, to find out after careful consideration and having all the information before you, that you as residents express your support or non-support in form of a vote. So yes, and I would agree. For you, if you really have only 1.5 regular garbage bags and manage your materials otherwise, yes, it is likely not going to be of benefit to you.
Yeah, and I get that that's frustrating. I will note that we may have included households within the service area that are not indeed logistically possible to service. We can't go down every road at this juncture, and so if and when the service goes ahead and we do identify households that are absolutely impossible or unsafe to service, then we would exclude those properties. If you would fit into that category, then you might be excluded in that case. I can't make any promises, but that is a factor in that regard. But yeah, I hope that answers the question, even if it's frustrating.
Okay, Chair. No more questions. Oh, one more. Again from Brent, and this is the third time he's asking a question, and all good questions, Brent, and I'll read that out. I would suggest then that the system be directed towards subdivision rather than us rural acreages. This is where an opt-out would be advisable. And I don't know if we can answer that one or not.
I don't think this is a question. I think this is a comment. But I think Matt already explained that we have to define a service area initially, that is then go to referendum. That doesn't mean we don't tweak over the years the service locations. If as Matt said, certain locations are absolutely not serviceable, or we missed that something that is serviceable and wants to join, that we bring them in. So minor tweaks will be happening over time, but we have to initially define an area because we need to create a budget based on what is the revenue, what is the amount we need to collect, and what is the area that we are reasonably can service. So that's what we have done, and that's what is before you for decision to support or reject.
So he has another question where, all right, during the voting process, will our location of residence be noted? And I think we've answered that one right at the beginning, Matt, that everybody in a defined area will be allowed to vote on this issue. So I don't know if you can maybe expand on that or.
That's correct. I wouldn't say that like staff won't be at the polls discussing the service with voters. This is something that if the service goes ahead, we would look to connect at a later date to review those types of considerations, but we will not be at the polls discussing the details of the service or anything like that. It will be an impartial third party like administered like an election. So yeah, but if there are considerations, then we can follow up with residents, and that is something that we would like to do.
Okay, no further questions in chat. Chair Newell, it's all yours.
Well, what we traditionally like to do is just him and haw a little bit toward the end of the meeting before adjourning it, just in case there is a last moment question that pops into someone's mind. But seeing none, I want to thank Matt and Uli for their just a great presentation, great work, and great answering of the questions. And certainly Director Popoff and I would answer questions people may have prior to the referendum. And of course, Matt has mentioned how to look for information, email organics@rdck if you have questions that need further elucidation. And without further ado, I think I shall sign off. So thanks everyone for showing up, and you know how to get a hold of us. Thanks again, Matt. Take care.
Thanks everyone.
Okay, I'm going to click leave, and I think that'll